Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our NorthStar Community Online service and in-person service. So good to be here today. Getting started a little bit late today. Had a great moment today. We had one of our young ladies get baptized today, so it's always good for those things to happen, and always good to start late for those reasons. So we continue to talk about recovery, and we look at it, and I always tell people, so for you that are family members that are out here listening right now, don't confuse what you see from behaviors of people who are addicted with what's going on the inside. On the outside, we might see bravado, we see lying, we see hiding, we see all the various things that are so hard to deal with and so hard to put up with. And if you are listening to this and you are a former addict or an addict who's in recovery, you know all these things. We talk about the addictive thinking all the time, that we lie a lot to others, but who we really lie to the most is ourselves. And the reason we do that is because we're covering up so much pain and so much shame from our lives and how we see ourselves. And so on the outside, we see the bravado, we see the destructive living, we see either people hiding and doing nothing all the way to people living almost with a death wish. But there's things that cause all that, and that's what at NorthStar we really work on, is just helping us to become more aware of what creates these problems and all this stuff we feel about ourselves. So for me, the formula is awareness is the key to our recovery. So for many of us, we've had we're living with post-traumatic stress in our lives. We've either experienced a lot of trauma or abandonment or both. We were in families that were highly dysfunctional, or we were in families that weren't able to emotionally connect. Usually for many of us, our generations before us have struggled and suffered themselves. And then it comes to us and what we do with all that. So we live our lives with this abandonment, with this trauma. It creates a wounded self in us. We come to see ourselves as unlovable and unworthy. That creates toxic shame in our life, which creates so much pain and self-loathing in ourselves. We come to believe that we can only trust no one. Actually, don't trust ourselves. We can't trust anyone else. And then we find substances or compulsive negative behaviors or other people to help us to avoid our pain. For many of us, we do all of the above or a couple of those. And because we're working so hard to avoid our pain, we become addicted. And when we become addicted, we lose ourselves. We become bitter, we have envy, we live with shame. And we really either have a choice when we get to this point of either we recover or we die. And it's amazing how we know that, but how hard it is to overcome our addictions, just because living with ourselves is so painful, so hard to do because of how much we resent and live with disgust for ourselves. So we've been talking about regret, and we're going to talk about it again. And the reason for this is to help us start to understand how regret is a form of faulty thinking that creates lots more shame in us. And we already got enough shame. We don't need to keep adding to it. So when we look at this 12 steps, of course, the first 3 steps I'll really condense into saying, I can't, he can, so let him. We know that when we get to step 1, we've realized that our addictions are too overpowering. They're too strong for us to do by ourselves. We can't do it, but God can, and if we just let him. Well, guess what step 4 is? Step 4 is that wonderful step of we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. That's the one that a lot of people get hung up on or don't do. But the fact is, as we come to understand regret and talk about it more, hopefully we can start seeing that making this searching and fearless moral inventory actually is what's so important for us to get past all of that we talked about earlier, about the wounded self, the toxic shame, the living a life of avoidance of pain. And the point is we need people around us to do this. We can't do it by ourselves, so I'm glad you're on here listening. If you're here locally, hopefully you can come by NorthStar sometime and join us to see how we do this, or of course, join and go to any of the AA meetings that we have every day all over the place. If you're somewhere else, hopefully you can find your recovery there. But if we can understand regret, that means that we can understand how regret forms in us, and how we can find ways maybe to take away some of that toxic shame we carry around with us. And again, make sure we understand what toxic shame is. The difference between shame and toxic shame is that shame is valuable and important. It helps us to learn. It helps us to not make mistakes again. It helps us to overcome the things that we've done that we wish we hadn't done. The problem is that for many of us in recovery, we have such a traumatic, abandoned background in our lives, it's hard for us to not take that a step further and turn to toxic shame. So toxic shame is where we basically beat us up all the time. We see ourselves as nothing but a loathsome, low-life person. So kind of the way to put it symbolically is, if I have shame, I made a mistake. If I have toxic shame, I am a mistake. And those are wildly different ways of looking at how we are and how we see ourselves. And so what we're after here is if we can figure out ways to see how we distort our memories and how those increase our regrets, we might be able to recover more successfully. So our goal is to have a rich, full, meaningful life. You ever thought about that for a minute? What would it be like to actually wake up with almost no anxiety, almost no depression, actually not in fear of the future, that you're living your life, at least at some level, with a passionate purpose, that you wake up with meaning in your life, you have relationships that are healthy, you can connect other people, you can focus on how to get better, and it actually works. So the problem is, with regret, it overwhelms us. This quote, again, you've heard me say it a couple times, you've been listening here, but my body is not a temple, it's a storage unit for my regrets. And that was a quote on Twitter. I haven't found a lot of us can relate to that quote. So I'm going to read 2 Corinthians 12. This is Paul. So again, for you guys that understand who Paul is, Paul wrote about half of the New Testament. He's seen as really kind of after the apostles, he took over many of the activities with Peter and James and all the others, and really created Christianity as we know it today. Focuses a great deal on grace and God's love, Christ's love for us. But he was also tough. He was tough on others. He was tough on himself. And this is about him. Again, we don't really know what his handicap was, but Paul had something. And this is what he's talking about. Because of the extravagance of those revelations, and so I wouldn't get a big head, I was given the gift of a handicap to keep me in constant touch with my limitations. Satan's angel did his best to get me down, and what he in fact did was push me to my knees. No danger then of walking around high and mighty. At first I didn't think of it as a gift and begged God to remove it. 3 times I did that, and then he told me, "My grace is enough, it's all you need. My strength comes into its own in your weakness." And I hope that we can hear that, because, oh my gosh, this is so much about recovery. When we figure out that God's love is enough for us, and that when we're addicted, when we're hitting that rock bottom, that's when we're the most available to God. So Paul continues, "Once I heard that, I was glad to let it happen. I quit focusing on the handicap and began appreciating the gift. It was a case of Christ's strength moving in on my weakness. Now I take limitations in stride, and with good cheer, these limitations that cut me down to size, abuse, accidents, opposition, bad breaks, I just let Christ take over. And so the weaker I get, the stronger I become." So Paul understood that his handicap made him better. We don't know what it is. I'm sure it would have been He'd probably grew to accept it as we see in the scripture, but we don't know. But for us in recovery, it's kind of the same thing. We can become bitter and cynical and angry about all of our past, about the mistreatments, the abuse, and even the things we did to others, how we abused others. We can take all of our past traumas and abandonments and be angry, or we can turn them into a gift. And the fact is, I know it's hard to hear sometimes, and particularly if you're early in your recovery and you're carrying around a lot of confusion and anger at other people who've harmed you, or you may be confused and angry at yourself for some of the harm you've done. But here's the fact. I can't turn the clock back. You can't turn the clock back. All we can do is build on our future. If we can understand that, then we can become much stronger in our life. But regret is an important process to understand here because of how we do it. So it's better to see regret as a process and not a one-time event. And the good news is that regret makes us human. Regret makes us better if we see it for what it is. And helping us understand our past and having a more realistic view of decisions can help us to recover. So here's the problem for us as people. We have two amazing abilities that we put together to make regret at times way more difficult and unrealistic than it really is. So we can visit the past and the future in our minds, and we can tell a story that never actually happened. So we're seasoned time travelers, and we're skilled storytellers. We put those two together, we have a way of really creating some unrealistic and probably untrue memories of our regrets. So the problem is the ability of us to travel through time and rewrite our regrets is what we do is we compare. The emotion, so I quote Daniel Pink here in his book, the emotion becomes regret only when we board the time machine, negating the past and contrasting our grim actual present with that, what might have been. So comparison lives at regret's core. So the regrets we have about what we could have done, should have done, ought to have done, how we're just such a disappointment to what we should be, if only taking those risks, blah, blah, blah. If I hadn't cheated, if I hadn't hurt those other people, all these things. So what we do is we blame ourselves so strongly. So there's basically 4 regrets to look at. One is foundation regret. The second one's boldness regret. The third is connection regret. And the fourth is moral regret. So what we have to understand about to help us with regret is if we can look at the regrets we have, put them into some categories, we can also see the good in it that's driving us to feel bad about ourselves. So with foundation regret, which is if only I had done the work, right? How many of us a little bit older regret that we didn't go to school, or we didn't save more money, or we didn't take better care of ourselves, or that if we hadn't used all those drugs when we were younger, we'd be healthier today. Or we're having regret that we wish we hadn't smoked all those years. Whatever it is, we regret that we spent so much time online instead of connecting with people. Those are all foundation regrets. And if I'd only done the work earlier, my life would be more stable today. Well, the problem with that one is that there's some truth to that, obviously, but we forget again, when we look back in our lives, we forget what was going on. We forget the context. We forget we were children, or we forget that, we weren't making much money, and we forget that there was lots of stuff going on. We forget about the shame levels we had, all those things. The second regret is boldness regret. And if only I'd taken the risks, if only I'd not been afraid, if only I'd been stronger, if only I'd been braver, if only I'd been this, only been that, then I could have really grown into this life, and sometimes what we do there, of course, in our compare and our blame stuff we do, is we go out and we look for people who are wildly successful and then compare ourselves to them to make ourselves feel even worse about ourselves. But the fact is, again, we forget about all the things that's going on in our lives back whenever it was and what was going on inside of us, what was happening around us, all those things. So boldness regret is that regret, I just didn't do more. And of course, if for us, a lot of with toxic shame in our lives, toxic shame can do a couple things for us. That one of the biggest problems with toxic shame is it takes away our limits. So the one problem is if we don't watch ourselves, we will live very recklessly, very addictively, and create all sorts of problems. We'll spend too much, we'll drink too much, we'll drive too fast, all those things, and we'll get tickets for speeding and for DUIs, and then all of our money goes away, and blah, blah, blah. But the other problem with toxic shame is sometimes what it does is we have such a low level of belief in ourselves that we won't take any risks. So those are all things, but we forget about those things. Before recovery, we were messed up. We weren't where we needed to be. But the hope is we're there now, and so we can still live with boldness now. Connection regrets, if only I'd reached out, if only I hadn't, think about some of the, when in recovery, a lot of times what we have to think about are when we became addicted, we lived with bravado, we were very destructive, we expected the healthy people to reject us, and so we hung with the people who weren't good for us. And so we have regrets about love there. But if we would have just, I think about that one teacher who really cared for me that I wished I would have treated better, or I wished I would have kept in touch with, or maybe an adult that really cared about me as a kid and I've lost track of them, or people as adults that were good and we just either rejected them or just didn't stay up with them. And of course the moral regret is the goodness in our life. If only I'd done the right thing. This one hurts to the core for many of us because we're good and decent people, most of us. We feel bad when we harm others. We feel bad when we don't do the right things. We feel bad when we cheat, or we steal, or we harm, or we hurt. And so that regret is about goodness. So our regrets are foundation regrets, boldness regrets, connection regrets, moral regrets, but what they're really about are stability, growth, love, and goodness. And so we have to understand regret, we have to understand the good we're after, or that we don't think we've done. So to better understand regret, we need to look at the good in us that we have lost. We seek a measure stability, and this is Daniel Pink writing, a reasonable, sturdy foundation of material, physical, and mental well-being. We hope to explore and grow by pursuing novelty and being bold. We aspire to do the right thing, to be seen as good people who honor our moral commitments. We yearn to connect with others, to forge friendships and family relationships bonded by love. We want a solid foundation. A little boldness, basic morality, meaningful connections. And it's the negative emotions of regret that reveals the positive path for living. So we see regret as something we want to avoid, not look at. What I'm suggesting today is for us to get better, we have to look at our regrets, understand them, put some awareness to it, and let go of some of the toxic shame that goes with it. So think about, again, for many of us, if you remember the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey that measures abuse, neglect, violence, all those kind of things in your childhood, for many of us in recovery, of course, we have high ACE scores. Can we make those ACE scores even work for us to make us better people, to be empathetic, to live better, to get rid of some of the toxic shame in our lives so we can live with less regret? And so we have this thing where we talk about the continuum of true self and wounded self. Actually, wounded self, true self. So wounded self says, I am unworthy, I'm unlovable, you would not like me if you got to know me. I don't really live with purpose. I have very few connections, and most of those aren't very good. I don't trust people. I assume everyone will harm me, and my addictions, my hurts, habits, and hang-ups are my master. On the other side of the continuum, we have true self, and that is, I am a good, decent person. If you really got to know me, you would like me. Certainly I got some flaws. Certainly I got things to work on, but I'm still a good and decent person. I have healthy connections in my life because I see myself as worthy. I'm able to tell people no when I need to and tell people yes when I need to. At the end of the day, I love God and I know God working in my life. So here we are, wounded self, true self. And it's really hard for many of us. None of us are true self 100% of the time. Hopefully not a lot of us are 100% of the time wounded self. But for many of us, we're way too this side. We're way too on the wounded self side. And a lot is because of our toxic shames, because of the way we see our life in the past, because of the judgment we put on ourselves. And we have to figure out ways to stop minimizing our past realities and using those to torture and punish us now. So when we minimize past realities, we forget that the pain and the hurt we were in and how we were just surviving to get by. We have these regrets now. Maybe we can look at those a little more lovingly and go, you know what? I had resilience. I was strong. I got through some very difficult times. It's amazing I'm still here. It's amazing I'm still standing. And now I'm in recovery. That's pretty awesome. That's pretty good. And we just got to keep reminding ourselves that the regret machine makes us look back in unrealistic and judgmental ways. And the way to overcome this, of course, is to see the gift in regret, to getting yourself into some support groups around other people so they can help us to see our regrets more realistically. And let's not forget this, regret, there's three great benefits of regret if we will do it right. Regret can improve decision making. So again, we talked about the difference between shame and toxic shame. If I have shame about something, I don't like it. I don't want to repeat that. I don't want to do that again, right? But toxic shame is we despise ourselves so much we actually go out and find ways to harm ourselves. So we need to see regret as a way to improve our decision making so we won't make the same mistakes. So if we say there was someone that we regret that we didn't reach out to, who we heard was not doing well, and they ended up committing suicide because of their addiction recovery, now if we hear about somebody who's not doing well, maybe we'll be a little faster to reach out to them. Regret can improve performance. It can help us to deepen our persistence, make us more resilient. It will help us elevate our performance. Maybe when we're beating ourselves up for some of the things we wish we would have done, we can say to ourselves, you know what, today's a good day to get started on my life again. Lingering on regrets doesn't work, but learning from regrets does. And third, regret can deepen meaning. We can look at all these harms, these hurts, these regrets, and maybe we can find some meaning in it. We can find ways to be there for others. We can find ways to not use, to live our lives less addictively in ways that are benefit to others around us. So I saw this, and this is what I think we should really think about. We talk about a lot in here about living with intentional gratitude. A life of intentional gratitude helps us see, I think it helps us see God working in our lives. When we're in a situation where we even in sometimes in those days where it's hard to find those three gratitudes, if we just keep doing it, we can actually start to see how God works in our lives. And so one of the things that was suggested was to try this, and so I'm going to challenge you to do this. I've done it a few times, and I would tell you I do think it works, is to write down 3 things you're grateful for, and then write down 3 regrets you're holding on to. And a lot of people are like, what are you talking about? Why would I want to do that? But what, again, we're saying is, we say that with the regrets, it improves our decision making, it improves our performance, and it can deepen our meaning in our life. So think about it. If I write down 3 things I'm grateful for what's happening in my life, I'm grateful for things that are good that's going on. But if I write down 3 regrets, the idea is I can learn from that. Not to dwell on it, but to learn from it, to see again how God works in our lives, how we can overcome those regrets. And you know what? If we do this, we might even be able to see how our past hurts, mistakes, and regrets can help us be a better person today and recover. And we can put that down as a gratitude. So anyway, something to think about. So I thank you for joining me today. I will tell you that talking about regrets has been a challenging one for me. You know, it's been difficult times for me to talk about this. But I certainly am learning a lot. I'm hoping the same with you. And again, I challenge you to try the 3 gratitudes, 3 regrets, see what happens. See if you don't see something a little different. I have found it to work pretty well. Like I said, when I first heard that, I was like, why would I want to do that? But if you see regrets for what they are, as unrealistic, and we're probably being way too judgmental of ourselves. Perhaps we can take some of that off. We can't turn the clock back, but we sure can use it to move forward and learn from them. So we meet on, again, so if you're here locally, love to have you come join us. We meet on Fridays at 6:30 and Wednesdays at 6:30. Our Friday night is our big support meeting. On Wednesday night, we have a little more like book study there, a little bit smaller group, but it's great. People really love it who go. We also have Sunday mornings at 9:30, and then, of course, we have this service at 11:15. So we have options for you. Also, don't forget there's an AA out there. There's a lot of recovery groups out there. I hope that you will, if you're listening to this, I'm assuming you're some level of recovery. I hope that you are moving forward, taking off the toxic shame a little bit, overcoming some of the regret thinking you have to make yourself even be able to recover even easier. So at the end of each service, we always end with the prayer of serenity because it's such a great reminder of how we need to live spiritually. So let's go ahead and close with the prayer of serenity. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as a pathway to peace. Taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. Trusting that Jesus will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever and the next. Amen. Again, thank you for joining today, and I hope you have a great recovery week. Thank you, Paul. Thank you.